They were ready to give up on a paralyzed horse until a little girl changed everything. The morning had started like any other at Oak Ridge Stables. The sun was just beginning to peek over the distant hills, casting long shadows across the dew-covered training arena. For the Bennetts, it was supposed to be another day of preparing their prized horse Valor for the upcoming regional championships. Valor wasn't just any horse. With his gleaming chestnut coat and powerful build, he had quickly become the family's pride and joy since they purchased him 3 years ago. At only 7 years old, he had already won several local competitions and was showing promise to compete at national level. Martha Bennett watched from the sidelines as her husband Tom guided Valor through his morning jumps. "He's looking stronger every day," she called out, snapping photos on her phone to share with their daughter later. Tom nodded in agreement. "One more round and we'll call it a morning," he replied, turning Valor toward the final sequence of jumps. No one could have predicted what happened next. As Valor approached the triple oxer, a challenging jump he had cleared dozens of times before, something spooked him. Perhaps it was a bird that flew too close or a sudden gust of wind, but the horse hesitated mid-stride. In that split second of confusion, his rhythm broke. Tom felt the shift beneath him and knew they were in trouble. Valor's front legs caught the top rail. The horse tumbled forward in a tangle of limbs while Tom was thrown clear. The sickening thud that followed seemed to echo across the entire stable yard. Martha dropped her phone and ran toward them, her heart pounding in her chest. "Call Dr. Lin, now," Tom shouted to one of the stable hands who had rushed over. He was already kneeling beside Valor, who lay motionless except for his labored breathing and occasional attempts to lift his head. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Lin arrived with her team, carefully examining Valor while the Bennetts watched with growing dread. The horse had suffered trauma to his spine. Though he wasn't completely paralyzed, he had lost significant function in his hind legs. "I wish I had better news," Dr. Lin said softly, removing her gloves as she stepped away from Valor, who had been sedated and made comfortable in his stall. "The damage is extensive. He might regain some movement with intensive care. But the chances of him walking normally again, let alone jumping," she shook her head. "There must be something we can do," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Lin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We can try pain management and some physical therapy, but you need to prepare yourselves. Many owners in this situation make the difficult decision to euthanize. It would be understandable if you chose that route." Tom's face hardened. "So you're saying we should give up on him?" "I'm saying you should consider what's best for Valor. He's facing a long, painful road with very uncertain outcomes. Think about his quality of life." As Dr. Lin left, promising to return the next day, the Bennetts stood in silence beside their fallen champion. The stable, usually buzzing with activity, seemed eerily quiet, as if the whole place was holding its breath. "2 weeks," Tom finally said. "We'll give it 2 weeks before we make any decisions." Martha nodded, reaching out to stroke Valor's neck. Neither of them knew that this accident would be just the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would soon include an unlikely hero who would change everything. They were ready to give up on a paralyzed horse until a little girl changed everything. The 2 weeks after Valor's accident were the hardest the Bennett family had ever faced. Each morning, Tom would arrive at the stables before dawn, spending hours researching treatment options on his tablet while sitting beside Valor's stall. Martha took the afternoon shift, often bringing soup and sandwiches that went untouched as they watched their once vibrant horse struggle. "He's fighting," Tom said one evening as they drove home, the car headlights cutting through the darkness. "Did you see how he tried to shift his weight today?" Martha squeezed her husband's hand but said nothing. She'd noticed something different, the dullness in Valor's eyes, how he would sometimes give up mid-therapy session, his head dropping to the straw beneath him. The daily routine became painfully familiar. Dr. Lin visited 3 times that week, overseeing the basic rehabilitation exercises and adjusting Valor's medication. The stable hands helped turn Valor every few hours to prevent bedsores, using a complicated system of padded slings. Everyone moved around with hushed voices and careful steps, as if the stable had become a hospital ward. "I found a specialist in Kentucky," Tom announced during dinner on the 10th day. "He's had success with cases like Valor's. He pushed a printout across the table to Martha, watching her face carefully. Martha scanned the article, trying to ignore the statistics at the bottom of the page. Only 8% of horses with similar injuries returned to any kind of normal function. The treatment would cost more than they'd paid for Valor himself. "We'd have to sell the truck," she said quietly. "Maybe take a second mortgage." "I know," Tom's voice cracked. "But what choice do we have?" The next morning, they arrived at the stables to find an unexpected visitor. Lily, a 10-year-old girl from the neighboring farm, was sitting cross-legged outside Valor's stall, her blonde hair falling in messy braids around her small face. "What are you doing here, honey?" Martha asked, surprised to see the child so early. Lily stood up quickly, brushing hay from her overalls. "My mom said Valor got hurt. I brought him something." She held up a small, hand-drawn picture of a horse surrounded by flowers and rainbows. "My grandpa says when someone's sick, you should visit them so they don't get lonely." Tom and Martha exchanged glances, neither wanting to explain the gravity of Valor's condition to the child. "That's very kind," Tom said, "but Valor needs lots of rest right now." "Can I just put this where he can see it?" Lily asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. "It'll only take a second." Martha nodded, and they watched as the little girl carefully taped her artwork to the outside of Valor's stall. Then she stood on her tiptoes and whispered something through the bars before turning to leave. "What did you tell him?" Martha couldn't help asking. Lily smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "I told him not to worry because horses are stubborn, just like my grandpa. And Grandpa always says being stubborn is how you win the hard fights." After Lily left, something shifted in the air between Tom and Martha. They hadn't realized how the heaviness of their own despair had been filling the stable and possibly affecting Valor too. That evening, instead of discussing medical reports, they brought a radio to the stable and played the country music Valor always seemed to enjoy during grooming sessions. Tom even found himself telling jokes while massaging Valor's muscles, the same silly ones he used to share on long drives to competitions. "We've been acting like he's already gone," Martha said, watching Valor's ears perk up at the familiar tunes. "But he's still here." As their 2-week deadline approached, the Bennetts weren't any closer to a miracle cure. But something had changed. A tiny spark of hope had been lit by a child's simple belief that sometimes being stubborn enough to keep fighting was all that mattered. They were ready to give up on a paralyzed horse. Until a little girl changed everything. The day after Lily's first visit, Tom and Martha arrived at the stables to find the little girl had beaten them there again. This time she wasn't alone. Her mother stood nearby, looking apologetic. "I'm so sorry if she's bothering you," the woman said, reaching for her daughter's shoulder. "She insisted on coming back. We can leave right away." "She's not bothering us," Martha assured her. "I'm Martha Bennett, and this is my husband Tom." "Jenny Miller," the woman replied with a tired smile. "And you've met my determined daughter." Lily wasn't paying attention to the adults' conversation. She had already slipped away and was sitting by Valor's stall, pulling something from her backpack, a worn copy of Black Beauty. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" Tom asked, crouching down beside her. "Reading to Valor," Lily explained as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "My teacher says stories help heal broken hearts, so I thought maybe they could help heal broken horses too." Jenny stepped forward. "Lily, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett are busy with Valor's treatment. We shouldn't." "Actually," Martha interrupted, watching as Valor's ears twitched toward the sound of Lily's voice, "I think Valor might enjoy the company." That morning began what would soon become a daily ritual. The Bennetts would arrive to find Lily already there, reading aloud in her clear, childish voice. Sometimes she paused to show Valor the pictures or explain parts of the story she thought he might not understand. "Do you really think this helps?" Dr. Lynn asked quietly one morning, watching the scene from a distance. "I don't know," Tom admitted, "but his vital signs seem stronger when she's here. And honestly, it's the only time I've seen him look interested in anything since the accident." By the end of the 3rd week, something remarkable was happening. Valor began nickering softly whenever Lily arrived. His eyes would follow her movements, and he seemed more willing to attempt his therapy exercises after her reading sessions. "It's her energy," Martha told Tom as they watched Lily demonstrate to Valor how she could hop on one foot. "She doesn't see a dying horse. She just sees Vala. One rainy afternoon, when Lily arrived soaking wet from running across the fields, Martha took her aside. "Honey, why don't you use our phone to call your mom for a ride home when you're done today?" Lily shook her head, water droplets flying from her braids. "Mom's working double shifts this week. It's just me and Grandpa at home, and he can't drive anymore." Martha's heart twisted. "So you've been walking all this way by yourself? Every day?" "It's not that far," Lily shrugged. "And I promised Vala I'd come." That night, the Bennetts had a long conversation at their kitchen table. The 2-week deadline had come and gone. Their savings were dwindling fast from Vala's medical expenses, and the specialist in Kentucky had warned them that even with treatment, the odds remained stacked against them. "We can't keep going like this forever," Tom said, rubbing his tired eyes. "It's not fair to Vala if he's suffering without real hope." Martha nodded slowly. "I know. But there's something about Lily that makes me want to hold on a little longer. She sees possibilities we don't." The next morning, they arrived with fresh resolve and a proposal for Jenny Miller. They would offer Lily a small stipend to officially become Vala's reading companion 3 times a week. They'd also provide transportation to and from the stables. "It's not charity," Tom explained when Jenny looked hesitant. "The vet thinks Lily's presence has therapeutic value. She's actually helping with his recovery." Jenny finally agreed, and Lily was ecstatic. That afternoon, she arrived with a notebook and colored pencils. "What's that for?" Martha asked. "Vala's progress journal," Lily announced proudly. "Grandpa says if you want something to get better, you have to keep track of all the good days, even the tiny good things." She opened to the first page, where she had carefully printed the date and written, "Today Vala moved his right back leg 3 times on purpose. He also ate all his apple slices." Looking at the little girl's hopeful face, Martha felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks, a genuine belief that maybe, just maybe, Vala still had a chance. Not because of medical science, but because a child had decided that giving up simply wasn't an option. The idea came to Martha in the middle of the night. She sat bolt upright in bed, startling Tom awake. "Water therapy," she said, grabbing her phone and turning on the flashlight. "Remember that article we skimmed last week? About horses recovering in water?" Tom rubbed his eyes, trying to focus. "You mean hydrotherapy? That's for high-end racing stables. We don't have that kind of equipment." "But what if we could find someone who does?" Martha was already pulling up search results. "There's a rehabilitation center about 2 hours from here. They specialize in equine water therapy." By sunrise, they were on the phone with Dr. Rodriguez, the director of Clear Springs Equine Rehabilitation Center. To their surprise, she didn't immediately dismiss their case. "Partial paralysis cases are challenging," she admitted, "but not always hopeless, especially if the horse still has some voluntary movement. Send me his medical records and videos, and I'll evaluate if our program might help." 3 days later, they found themselves in a large, modern facility with the smell of chlorine in the air. Dr. Rodriguez led them past a massive indoor pool with a mechanical lift system. "This is where we'd start Vala once he's acclimated," she explained. "The water supports his weight while allowing movement with minimal pain. It's like physical therapy, but gentler on the injured tissues." Tom glanced at the price sheet in his hand and tried not to wince. "And do you think there's a real chance?" "I've seen horses with similar injuries make significant improvements," Dr. Rodriguez said carefully. "Not complete recoveries, I won't promise miracles, but enough to give them comfortable lives. The question is whether you're willing to commit to the process. We're talking months, not weeks." On the drive home, Martha and Tom barely spoke. The financial reality was daunting. They'd need to sell their second car and possibly borrow from Tom's retirement fund. Even then, it would be tight. "What do we tell Lily?" Martha finally asked as they pulled into their driveway. She's so invested now. "We tell her the truth," Tom said. "That we're trying everything possible, but she needs to understand this might not work." When they broke the news about moving Vala to the rehabilitation center, Lily's reaction surprised them. Instead of tears of disappointment, she nodded solemnly, her small face serious. "Can I still visit him there?" she asked. "It's a 2-hour drive each way, sweetheart," Martha explained gently. "We can't ask your mom to do that." Lily thought for a moment. What if I only visit on Saturdays? Mom doesn't work then. And I can make videos for Vala to watch during the week. Her solution was so practical, so determined, that the adults couldn't help but smile. By the end of the week, arrangements had been made. Vala would be transported to Clear Springs, and the Bennetts would drive Lily and her mother for Saturday visits whenever possible. The day they loaded Vala onto the special transport trailer was gut-wrenching. It took 6 people using a complex system of slings and ramps to move him safely. Throughout the process, Lily sat where Vala could see her, reading his favorite stories as if it were any other day. Her calm voice seemed to keep him steady when the handlers struggled with the equipment. "He's being so brave," she whispered to Martha as they watched the trailer pull away. "Now we have to be brave too." The first weeks at Clear Springs were the hardest. Vala struggled to adjust to the new environment and the intensive therapy sessions. During their Saturday visits, they often found him exhausted, his eyes dull with pain and effort. The hydrotherapy had begun, but progress was painfully slow. "The muscles are starting to respond," Dr. Rodriguez told them during their 3rd visit. "But he's fighting us. It's like he doesn't understand why we're putting him through this." Lily, who had been unusually quiet that day, suddenly spoke up. "That's because nobody explained it to him properly." Before anyone could stop her, she marched up to Vala's stall and began talking to him in a serious grown-up voice. "Listen here, Mr. Horse," she said, hands on her hips. "This pool is helping you, even if it's hard. It's like when I broke my arm and had to do exercises that hurt. The hurt part is how you get better." To everyone's astonishment, Vala nickered softly and nudged Lily's shoulder with his nose, the most voluntary movement they'd seen from him in weeks. Dr. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Well, I've never seen that approach in veterinary school, but it seems effective. Perhaps Lily should be here for his next water session." That afternoon, they watched through a window as Lily stood by the pool, cheering Vala on while the therapists guided him through the water. For the first time since beginning treatment, he completed the entire session without resisting. "That little girl," Dr. Rodriguez murmured to Tom and Martha, "is worth her weight in gold." On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in the backseat, clutching her progress journal, which now contained detailed notes about water therapy and muscle rebuilding. Martha looked back at her and then exchanged a glance with Tom. "We're going to find a way to make this work," she said quietly. For both of them, 1 month into Vala's treatment at Clear Springs, the bills were piling up faster than the Bennetts could manage. Tom had taken extra shifts at the construction company, often coming home well after midnight, his hands rough and cracked from the cold winter work. Martha had started selling homemade preserves at the local farmer's market to bring in extra cash. Their savings were nearly gone. "We need to talk about how long we can keep this up," Tom said one night, his voice heavy with exhaustion as he spread their finances across the kitchen table. Martha nodded, her own face lined with worry. "Dr. Rodriguez says he's making progress, but it's so slow. At this rate." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Jenny, Lily's mother, holding a large mason jar filled with bills and coins. "Lily wanted me to bring this over," she said, looking slightly embarrassed as she set the jar on the table. "She's been collecting donations for Vala's treatment. She set up a little stand at her grandfather's church bake sale last Sunday." Inside the jar was $87.42 and a note in Lily's careful handwriting, "For Vala's swimming lessons." "I told everyone he's learning to walk again." Tom stared at the jar, unable to speak. The amount wouldn't even cover a day of Vala's care, but the gesture hit him hard. "That's very sweet," Martha managed to say, "but we couldn't possibly." "There's more," Jenny interrupted. "My father, Lily's grandfather, he wants to help too. He called his friends from the VFW Hall. They're organizing a benefit dinner next month, and the church ladies want to do a quilt raffle." The Bennetts were stunned. They'd been so focused on their own struggle that they hadn't noticed how Vala's story had spread through their small community. "People want to help," Jenny said simply. "Lily talks about Vala to everyone she meets. She shows them the pictures of him in the water, fighting to get better. It's inspiring." That Saturday at Clear Springs, they noticed something different. A small crowd had gathered around the viewing window of the hydrotherapy room. Staff members who weren't on duty had come in to watch Vala's session. Inside, Lily stood beside the pool in her rubber boots and raincoat, calling out encouragement as two therapists guided Vela through his exercises. "Did you see that?" she shouted excitedly. He kicked his back leg all by himself. Dr. Rodriguez confirmed it wasn't just Lily's imagination. Vela had indeed shown increased voluntary movement in his right hind leg, a small but significant milestone. "We've been documenting all his sessions," the doctor explained, showing them a tablet with video clips. "His muscle tone is improving and the nerve responses are more consistent. It's too soon to make predictions, but these are positive signs." For the first time in months, the Bennetts allowed themselves to feel genuine hope. That evening, as they prepared to drive Lily home, they noticed her working intently on something in her progress journal. "What are you writing, honey?" Martha asked. Lily showed them a page divided into two columns. On the left was a list labeled Things Vala Can Do Now, and on the right, Things Vala Will Do Soon. The Now column included items like move his right back leg, eat carrots without help, and stand with the water sling. The Soon column had more ambitious goals: walk with a little help, go outside to see the sun, and at the very bottom, underlined 3 times, come home. "You really believe he'll do all these things?" Tom asked gently. Lily looked at him with complete certainty in her eyes. "Yes, because Vala doesn't know he's not supposed to get better. He just knows we're all waiting for him." The community fundraiser the following month exceeded everyone's expectations. The local newspaper had run a story about Vala and Lily, featuring photos of their Saturday therapy sessions. People from 3 counties showed up to the VF Public Hall, many of them bringing additional donations. Even the mayor made an appearance, presenting Lily with a Young Hero certificate that she immediately added to Vala's progress journal. The money raised wouldn't cover all of Vala's treatment, but it bought them precious time they desperately needed as winter turned to spring and Vala continued his slow but steady progress. Each week brought small victories that Lily faithfully recorded: Vala standing for 30 seconds with minimal support, his first steps in the underwater treadmill, the day he managed to turn himself around in his stall. Tiny miracles that might have seemed insignificant to others, but to the growing circle of people invested in his recovery, each one was worth celebrating. "You know what's remarkable?" Dr. Rodriguez said to Martha one afternoon as they watched Lily demonstrating to Vala how to lift his legs higher. "In situations like this, it's usually the humans who end up teaching the animal something. But in Vala's case, I think it's the other way around. That little girl is learning about perseverance and hope in a way no classroom could ever teach." Martha thought about the changes she'd seen in Lily over these months, how her shy, hesitant voice had grown confident as she directed Vala's therapy sessions, how she'd learned to speak up in medical discussions, asking questions that sometimes surprised even the professionals. "They're healing each other," she said softly, "and maybe healing all of us too." Summer arrived with its long golden days. Vala had been at Clear Springs for nearly 6 months, and the change in him was remarkable. Though still far from normal, he could now stand with minimal support for several minutes and take assisted steps in the water. Dr. Rodriguez had started him on a new therapy involving a special harness system that allowed him to practice walking while supporting only a fraction of his body weight. "Today's the day," Lily announced confidently one Saturday morning in June. She was wearing her lucky overalls and had tied her hair back with a ribbon that matched Vala's chestnut coat. "The day for what, sweetheart?" Martha asked, helping the girl carry her backpack of supplies. "The day Vala stands up all by himself. I wrote it in the journal last week." Tom and Martha exchanged glances. They'd learned not to dismiss Lily's predictions. She had an uncanny sense of Vala's capabilities that even the professionals sometimes missed, but they also worried about her setting herself up for disappointment. The therapy room was busy that morning. Dr. Rodriguez had invited a veterinary student to observe, and 2 of the regular therapists were preparing the equipment. There was a different energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that seemed to affect even Vala, who nickered excitedly when Lily approached. "We're going to try something new today," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Instead of the full harness, we're using this lighter support system. It will catch him if he falls, but it won't hold his weight. He'll need to stand on his own." Tom felt his stomach tighten. "Are you sure he's ready?" Physiologically speaking, his muscle tone has improved significantly. The question is whether he has the confidence to try. Lily was already at Vala's side, whispering in his ear as the therapists made final adjustments to the equipment. The horse's ears flicked back and forth, taking in her words. "What are you telling him?" the veterinary student asked curiously. "I'm reminding him of how far he's come," Lily replied without looking up. "And I'm telling him about all the things waiting for him when he gets better, the apple tree behind his old stable, the field where the dandelions grow, and how the sun feels on your back when you run." The preparations were complete. Everyone took their positions around Vala, ready to support him if necessary. The horse trembled slightly, seeming to understand that something important was happening. "Okay, on my count," Dr. Rodriguez said. "We'll ease off the support gradually. Lily, keep talking to him. He responds best to your voice." The next few minutes moved in slow motion. The support straps loosened incrementally. Vala's legs quivered with effort as more and more of his weight shifted onto them. His breathing quickened, and for a moment it seemed he might panic. "You can do it," Lily encouraged, her voice steady and clear. "Remember how you used to jump over fences twice as tall as me? This is much easier than that." Vala's right hind leg, his stronger one, was bearing weight now. Then, with tremendous effort, he shifted and brought his left leg fully beneath him. There was a breathless moment when everyone expected him to collapse, but instead, something miraculous happened. Vala stood, completely on his own. The support harness hung slack around him. His legs were steady, his head held high. A stunned silence filled the room, broken only by Lily's joyful laugh. "See? I told you today was the day." Dr. Rodriguez moved forward cautiously, checking Vala's position. "I can't believe it. He's actually doing it. Someone get the camera. We need to document this." One of the therapists scrambled for a phone, capturing video as Vala continued to stand unassisted for nearly a minute before gently lowering himself back down. Everyone burst into applause. Even the usually reserved veterinary student was wiping away tears. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Rodriguez said, reviewing the video footage. "Given the severity of his initial injury, I wouldn't have believed it possible without seeing it myself." Tom put his arm around Martha, both of them too overwhelmed to speak. After months of financial strain, emotional exhaustion, and fragile hope, they were witnessing what could only be described as a miracle. The video of Vala standing spread quickly. The local news station picked it up first, featuring it on their evening broadcast. Then a national animal rescue organization shared it on their social media pages. By the next morning, Vala had become an internet sensation. "Horse defies the odds thanks to little girl's faith," the headlines read. Comments poured in from around the world, messages of support, stories of other miraculous animal recoveries, and countless questions about how Lily had known today would be the day. "I didn't know," she told a reporter who called the Bennetts for a statement. "I just decided it would be, and then I told Vala so he would know too." That evening, as they celebrated with a small party at Clear Springs, Dr. Rodriguez took Tom and Martha aside. "With this kind of progress, I think we need to discuss the possibility of Vala returning home sooner than we anticipated. He'll need ongoing therapy, of course, but he's proven he can support his own weight now. The familiar environment might actually accelerate his recovery." "Home," Martha repeated, the word catching in her throat. "We had almost given up hope of ever bringing him home." "Well," Dr. Rodriguez smiled, glancing over at Lily, who was feeding Vala Celebration carrot slices. "It seems someone never lost faith, and in this case, that made all the difference." The day Vala came home to Oak Ridge Stables was unlike any other. The entire community had turned out to welcome him, lining the long driveway with handmade signs and cheering as the specialized transport trailer made its way up the gravel path. Tom had spent the previous week modifying Vala's old stall, adding the custom support bars and specialized flooring that Dr. Rodriguez had recommended for his ongoing recovery. Lily stood at the front of the crowd, practically bouncing with excitement. She had insisted on making a welcome home banner, which now hung across the stable entrance, slightly crooked but bursting with colorful hearts and horseshoes. In her hands, she clutched the progress journal, now so full of entries that the binding was starting to crack. Do you think he'll remember his old home? She asked Martha, her eyes never leaving the trailer as it came to a stop. I'm sure he will, Martha assured her. Horses have excellent memories, especially for places where they've been happy. Unloading Valor was a delicate process. Though he could now stand and even take several steps unassisted, the transport team used a special ramp and harness system to ensure his safety. As the trailer door opened, a hush fell over the crowd. Then Valor's chestnut head appeared, his ears pricked forward inquisitively. He sniffed the air, seeming to recognize the familiar sense of his old home. When his hooves touched the ground of Oak Ridge Stables for the first time in 8 months, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the onlookers. Valor's head shot up in surprise, but he didn't spook or falter. Instead, to everyone's amazement, he took 3 strong steps forward on his own, as if eager to return to his stall. He's walking better here than he did at the center, whispered one of the transport specialists. It's like he knows he's home. Lily broke free from the crowd and moved to Valor's side, careful to stay where he could see her. See? I told you we'd bring you back, she said, falling into step beside him as the handlers guided him toward the stable. And look at all these people who came to see you. The local news had sent a reporter who was interviewing Dr. Rodriguez about Valor's miraculous recovery. The veterinarian was careful with her words, emphasizing that while Valor's progress was extraordinary, it was the result of cutting-edge medical treatment, thousands of hours of therapy, and what she tactfully called an unusually supportive environment. In my professional opinion, she added, glancing at Lily, who was now showing Valor the modifications to his stall, the psychological component of recovery can be just as important as the physical one. Valor had something many injured animals don't, someone who absolutely refused to give up on him. As the crowd began to disperse and the excitement of the day wound down, Tom and Martha found themselves standing in the peaceful quiet of the stable, watching Lily read to Valor from a new book she brought especially for the occasion. I still can't believe we're here, Martha said softly. Do you remember that first night after the accident? When we thought we'd have tow. She couldn't finish the sentence. Tom nodded, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders. Every time I look at him, I think about how close we came to making the wrong decision. If it hadn't been for Lily. That conversation was interrupted by Jenny, who had come to collect her daughter. I hope she's not overstaying her welcome, she said with a smile. I told her Valor needs rest after his journey, but she insisted on finishing the chapter. She's never overstaying her welcome, Martha assured her. In fact, we wanted to talk to you about something. Over the past few weeks, as Valor's return home became a reality, the Bennetts had been doing a lot of thinking about the future. The media attention around Valor's recovery had brought unexpected opportunities. People had reached out asking if they could visit him, if they could hear his story firsthand. A children's book author had even contacted them about possibly writing Valor and Lily's story. We're thinking of starting something new here, Tom explained. A small program where children with disabilities or illnesses could spend time with Valor. We've already spoken with a therapist who specializes in equine therapy, and she thinks Valor would be perfect, given his gentle temperament and his own recovery journey. And we'd like Lily to be involved, Martha added, as our first junior volunteer, if that's okay with you. Jenny's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears. She would love that more than anything. This horse, this whole experience, it's changed her. She used to be so shy, so hesitant to speak up. Now her teachers can't believe the difference in her. From inside the stall, they heard Lily's voice, still reading steadily to Valor, who stood listening, his eyes half closed in contentment. She had reached the end of her book and closed it with a satisfied thump. That's the end of this story, she told Valor, patting his neck. But ours is just getting to the good part. 1 year to the day after Valor's accident, the Bennetts hosted an open house at what was now called Valor's Hope Equine Therapy Center. The star attraction was, of course, Valor himself, who could now walk slowly around the small paddock with only the slightest hint of his former disability. He would never jump again or race across open fields, but he had found a new purpose. Beside him, as always, was Lily, now the center's youngest therapy assistant. She led a small group of children around the stable, proudly showing them the progress journal that had documented every step of Valor's journey. Its final entry, written in her now confident handwriting, read simply, Today, I realized something important. Vala didn't just learn to walk again. He taught all of us how to believe in impossible things, and that might be the greatest victory of all.